Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, the whole crew styling when we step out of the car. Bouncers lift the rope and the crowd goes off. 20 shots to the table, we don't even hit the bar.
Want to welcome back our audience, our listeners, and our readers to a special edition of Inspicio Arts and this collaboration with the Florida International University Ratcliffe Art and Design Incubator. I want to welcome in someone that we're always collaborating, but today it's all about him. I want to celebrate Raymond Allman. You guys know him as Ray Allman. Welcome in.
Thank you. It's rare that I get to talk about something that's so personal to me as opposed to talking about what Inspicio Arts is doing.
So today I want to celebrate you, Ray, because I know that this project has, has kind of been coming for a while now. And I guess I really want to start for those people that may or may not know you, get more of a personal side and talk about who is Ray Allman. We'll start there.
My favorite topic.
Of course.
So I've had a lifelong career as an artist, and I also unusually have 2 degrees from the Wharton School. So when I graduated, when I got my MBA, I moved to New York and started working there, but not making art. And I felt like there was a big hole in my life. So I went back, even because I'd studied art at the University of Pennsylvania while I was in the Wharton School, both undergraduate and graduate. I took studio courses and all that. And then when I got to New York, I stopped painting for a year, felt there was a big hole in my life. So I went to NYU graduate school in art, in fine art. And I finally had a professor there named Knox Martin, an artist, a great artist, who was actually teaching at Yale, but he was helping a buddy out who was on sabbatical and teaching his course. And Knox and I connected like that, and we've been lifelong friends ever since. He's been my mentor ever since. And he's in his 80s or maybe 90s now, still alive. And he pushed all the right buttons in me and gave me confidence and a vision for what I wanted to do. And so I gave up New York and moved to Provincetown, the tip of Cape Cod, where there was a 150-year-old art colony that had been more the summer home than anything else for people like Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol and Robert Motherwell and Franz Klein and Hans Hofmann and all kinds of important artists, as well as many major writers, tons of Pulitzer Prize recipients and poets and all that. So I moved there in the winter of 1970, and in the wintertime, there weren't as many people there. And my reasoning, by the way, was I didn't have much money because I'd left a job. I didn't have any job when I got there. I didn't know a single person when I got there. And but I reasoned it would be cheap to live because it was too far away from Boston to be a commuting community. And I was right. And I got a 2-bedroom house on 30 acres of land on a bluff overlooking the sea, where I could watch the sun sink into the sea every night from my bedroom, from my living room. And I used one of the bedrooms as a studio. And basically, until 1989, I made only abstract art. I got very involved in the Provincetown art community. I started what I called the Outer Cape Repertory Film Society. The first year I was there, where I showed 16mm movies for peanuts, and had big crowds because there was nothing else to do. The nearest movie theater in the winter was 60 miles away. And there were only 3 TV stations in those days. And I became part of the art scene. I've gotten very involved with an institution that's a significant museum there now. It's called the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. I was on their board, and I was the head of the exhibition committee there, and various other things. And I got involved with various galleries. And that was my artistic home for all those years. In 1989, oh, and I also started a magazine there, Provincetown Arts Magazine, started it in 1985, before desktop publishing existed, and we were still doing printing out galleys and using and waxing them and putting them on boards and photographing it to make the magazine. And I got involved with the very first versions of digital page layout software while I was there. And that led me into a whole other avenue of my life. But I started Provincetown Arts Magazine in 1985. And that was kind of the genesis for the magazine that I started here. Provincetown Arts is still being published 37 years later. When I moved to Miami in 2012, I started Inspicio Arts Magazine in 2015. When my wife was pregnant with our son in 1989, I decided to document her pregnancy using some of the techniques I used in my to make collages in the abstract work that I did. And I created these 5 by 6 foot mixed media portraits of her pregnant, and later some portraits of our son. And I liked the process though so much that I thought, okay, I'd like to continue doing this. And I decided to start making portraits of people in the Provincetown Art Colony, the Outer Cape Cod Art Colony, and mainly what they did when they weren't working. So instead of doing paintings of artists in their studios, it was the things that they enjoyed about being on the Cape. So I did, for example, a portrait of Robert Motherwell on his deck with the boat in the background, Norman Mailer making a movie, et cetera, documenting the fabric of life in that art colony. And one of the inspirations for that also was when I was pursuing Buddhism back in the late 60s, early 70s, which is another part of the reason I moved to the Cape. I read a book called, by George Gurdjieff called Meetings with Remarkable Men. And it was documenting the people who had been influential in his life. And that's what I did with my painting series too. I thought that as a young 25-year-old artist, I came to Cape Cod and I was almost immediately embraced by these older established artists who had no reason to even talk to me, but they did because they were very welcoming. And I started documenting my life in that art colony by doing portraits of all those people. So I've been doing that ever since. And 4 of those portraits from that series from Provincetown are in the collection of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery and have been exhibited there. And some of my portraits and some of my abstract paintings are in embassies around the world. That started happening back in the 1970s, I think, late 70s, early 80s. And then when I moved to Miami year round, I thought, okay, well, I'll start doing the same thing down here. And the first person that I made a portrait of was Richard Blanco, who I had just seen at Obama's inaugural. And Richard was the 5th inaugural poet, a very handsome, wonderful man, and a great poet. And so the first portrait I made down here was of Richard. As Inspicio Arts was evolving, I was all of a sudden coming in contact with all the significant people in all arts disciplines in Miami. So I made a portrait of Lourdes Lopez, who's the artistic director of the Miami City Ballet, but she had been one of George Balanchine's primary muses, or principal ballerinas. I made a portrait of Campbell McGrath, who's a MacArthur Genius Award-winning poet, et cetera, et cetera. So Michelle O'Connor. And so I've been doing that series ever since. And one of the things that happened along the way was I also got involved and deeply involved with the Hampton House. And that was pure serendipity. because a professor at FIU, David Rifkind, said, I want you to meet somebody. And it was another history professor. David taught architecture, history professor named Ken Lapartito. And he had already received a pretty substantial grant to document the history of the Hampton House. And he was collecting artifacts and talking with people. And he asked me if I would bring my Inspicio Arts interview approach to interviewing people who had been performers or patrons of the Hampton House during segregation. And so I started doing that. And then along the way, the South Florida Arts Center, I think it was called, or Center for the Arts, became Oolite Arts, and they established an award their first year called the Ellie's Award. I applied for one of the first Ellie Awards and won it. And my proposition was that I would make my large scale, in this case, 40 by 60 inch mixed media portraits of people who were performers or patrons of the Hampton House during segregation. And I would also, my original idea was that I would have tablets next to each portrait when they were displayed that would show my video of them telling stories about the Hampton House. An interesting thing happened on the way to this exhibition. I got the award in 2018. All of a sudden there was a pandemic, and we had to sort of rethink things. And one of the great ideas I got from Jordana Pomeroy, who's the director of the Frost Art Museum, is instead of having tablets on the wall, which cost money and people can rip them off, and you're asking people to put on headphones during a pandemic and trade them from one person to another, she suggested that on the wall text, I put a QR code for each portrait. And then when you scan the QR code with your phone or your tablet, it links you to web pages that I created that shows an image of the portrait. And then it has the video clips of those people in the portrait telling their stories about the Hampton House. So in this video.
Just kicking off that. So now it kicks off during Black History Month, which starts in February. So your exhibit will be on February 1st and it'll run through the end of the month, right?
Right.
And then basically what will happen is that with the QR code, you'll be able to put your phone on it and be able to see the information, but you need your headset in order to listen, right?
Right, but your headset for your phone. So it could be earbuds or just the little wires or whatever you bring. And the other thing we can do with this video, which I'll overlay the QR codes on this video so people can scan them. I think if they pause the video, scan it with their QR code, they can link and see what I'm talking about.
So one of the people that I see on this list was a guest in our podcast at the Ratcliffe. It's Winston Scott. He's an astronaut, an educator, and a jazz trumpet player. So talk about, what was the inspiration for picking Winston Scott?
So the original people that I did the portraits of were people selected by Dr. Enid Pinckney, who's the person who saved the Hampton House from the wrecking ball. And she's in her 90s now. And so these were people that she selected were people that she knew that were living in Miami and had been helpful in saving the Hampton House and had been patrons or performers at the Hampton House in the 60s. Serendipitously, to use that word again, the New World Symphony had asked Winston Scott, who was a retired astronaut and had made 2 trips into space and 5 spacewalks, if he would come to a performance at the New World Symphony and give a talk about his experiences in space in connection with music they were playing that I'm calling celestial music. I don't know if that's what they would call it. I have to call them up someday and ask them how they titled that event. But so I was interviewing him for the New World Symphony. And one of the things that always amazes me is the African Americans I meet who grew up in Miami and never heard of the Hampton House. So now I'm in a mode of, I always ask people, especially if they're older, did you ever hear of the Hampton House? And when I asked him that question, he said, of course I did. As a matter of fact, I'm a good jazz trumpet player. And when I was a teenager, I used to sit in with the bands at the Hampton House. So that blew me away. And I thought, oh, well, I got to make a portrait of you.
No, that's a great story, but that's a great connection and a great story for, you know, for Winston Scott. I didn't know he was a jazz trumpet player until I read this.
Yeah,
And
I should add,
came up in the podcast.
I should add that he's still a jazz trumpet player, and he has a trio in a jazz combo in where he lives, which is up near Cape Kennedy, and he teaches at Florida Institute of Technology, and he teaches both science and music.
So I want to talk about some of the other people that are featured in this exhibition. It's Dr. Enid Pinckney, Winston Scott, Baketta Coiler, Reverend Dr. Walter T. Richardson, Dr. Mary Hyler, Alila Ali, widow of course, Muhammad Ali, right? Actress, and Patricia Smith Thomas, wife of vocalist Ricky Thomas. So we have some pretty interesting group here to, you know, in this exhibit that's, you know, being kicked off during Black History. What do you think, or what is it that you want your visitors to take away from this exhibit?
You just ended that with I was getting mentally prepared to talk about each person, which you still may want me to do, but when you asked that last question, you flipped my thinking. And I've been asking each of the people to send me a short bio that'll be on the wall text where the QR code is. And I was just reading one of them, and it's that Mary Hyler sent me. And Mary Hyler has a PhD, and she's done all kinds of different things in a education, communication management career. But she was singing in churches from the age of 3. And she had a 60-year career as a vocalist, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And when in my portrait of her, she's holding a photograph of her when she was, I think, about 16 or 17, and technically not allowed in the Hampton House, but she sang with Aretha Franklin at the Hampton House. And one of the things that she says in the biotext she sent me was that if she wasn't the headliner of something she was doing, she might be the opening act for people like Jackie Wilson and Aretha Franklin, and I'm forgetting all the names now, a whole bunch of extraordinary people that you would know their names. And she ended her bio by saying, the Hampton House was a classy place where the elite of the elite went to see the big stars. And so in its heyday, it was an extraordinary place in a thriving community, a thriving African American community. And one of the things that's so moving for me is that in this particular era of the last 5 years, white people have come to realize how much Black history they don't know, and how many communities were thriving before interstate highways split them in half, and how many communities like Tulsa were thriving before there was the Tulsa massacre, which I never heard of until Trump had tried to have a rally there on the anniversary of the massacre. And so there's this growing awareness of a world and a life that that if you weren't born into it, you didn't see it. And that is motivating me to help shine a spotlight on that any way I can.
So, you know, just to say that I'm guilty of not knowing everything about the Hampton House. And, you know, I was born and raised here in Miami. I know the area well. And you're absolutely right. You know, we've had other podcast guests come on and talk about exactly what you just said, you know, that we have some of these thriving communities that before the highway was built, for example, the I-95, you know, people forget about, you know, the Black entrepreneurs and the up and coming businesses and success stories. And it's not until recently that this tech boom in Miami became a subject, mainly, you know, thanks, I guess, to the mayors, right? Both of them, mainly Suarez, that, you know, these communities have sort of taken a forefront. And some of these Black entrepreneurs are now, you know, coming to light, and kind of the younger generation talking about the past. So I think it's a great time, Ray, to kind of bring this to light and talk about, you know, the Hampton House. And some of these, you know, people being exhibited here are going to be part of the history now of your exhibit. Thanks to, you know, this award that you got. I know you have a couple of sponsors here, right? We have the Wilsonian Public Humanities Lab. We have Inspicio Arts. We have Ulite Arts, right? The Miami-Dade County Cultural Affairs and the historic Hampton House. So the exhibit starts when? It starts Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday?
It starts on Tuesday. Yeah, it keeps on being, it's very confusing because it starts on February 1st. Somehow to say it's Tuesday, it feels like it started on Monday, but it's Tuesday, February 1st, and they wanted to do a second day for people who couldn't make it on the first, on the first, yeah. So on the second, which is Wednesday, we're going to do the same thing. So we're having a reception, and people in the portraits will talk on both days. The reception will be 3 to 6. I'm not exactly sure when people will start talking, probably when we have a critical mass to talk to. And you reminded me of something. Oh, so I wanted to tell you, this is kind of an aside, but in another one of our discussions, Maggie, we talked about the book, ABCs of Paradise Found. And there was a reception for the book and for the watercolors that illustrate the book last Saturday, January 22nd, at a gallery near the Bass Museum called Anthony Liggins Gallery 88. So I went to that, and I was introduced, well, when I started talking about the Hampton House in my own show to Anthony Liggins, the owner of the gallery, who's also an artist, he said, "Oh, you have to meet Kristen Kitchen." So he introduces me to Kristen Kitchen, and Kristen Kitchen tells me that she owns a historic Black hotel in Overtown that's called Dunn's Josephine, and she's restored it to with period furniture and things like that. And she has an art gallery there and jazz music and, you know, all kinds of things. And then the pandemic hit, and because she just opened that, and that screwed things up. And now she's using it for the time being to house homeless people. So we're talking, and I said, "Did you grow up in Miami?" And she said, "No, I grew up in Cincinnati." I said, "I grew up in Cincinnati." She says, "What neighborhood did you grow up in?" I said, "Roseland." She said, "I grew up in Roseland." She grew up, even though she's about 20 years younger than me, she grew up around the corner from me, and her mother taught at my high school. So
I think that you sometimes bump into people and discover.
So she embarked on this buying and restoring historically important Black-owned hotels in different cities across the country. And she has a company called 6 Acres. I'm assuming that's 6 acres and a mule, the old laws from a long time ago, or the granting of land. And so her first place that she developed was in Cincinnati 20 years ago. And it's called 6 Acres Bed and Breakfast, I think. So, you know, that's another example of what you're talking about with the reclaiming and light on the history of Black people in this country that that white people don't know about.
I'm sorry about the cough, Ray. Maybe you can edit that out. I just been so sick. So anyway, I want to end this conversation and invite everybody. We'll put the link on the social sites of where I guess people can RSVP. It's through Eventbrite, right? And I'll put the website in
Okay.
for those that want to visit, because I know that there's invited guests only to a certain reception, right?
Yes. So there's we have the event listed with Eventbrite, but it's free. You don't have to pay for the tickets. It's just so we can manage the number of people there, because we don't want to have, in the age of the pandemic, we don't want to have too many people there.
And of course, respecting all COVID protocols, people need to wear masks and observe social distance.
Yeah. And if you can throw being fully vaccinated in there, that would be
Well,
great
it's
too.
highly encouraged, right?
In the state of Florida, I don't have a right to mandate
Yeah.
that, but
That's why I
but-
said highly encouraged.
yeah.
Well, Ray Allman, always a pleasure and an honor to celebrate this special edition of Inspicio Arts and the collaboration with the Florida International University Ratcliffe Art and Design Incubator with this, special exhibition. It's called First Person Portraits, Hampton House Performers and Patrons. And I hope, everybody who's either watching us or listening or reading gets an opportunity to go down and see a piece of history.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Thank you, Ray. Have a great weekend.